We'll go ahead and get started. I'm Assistant Chief Deputy Zamora, and I'm over the Administrative Operations Command. I'm also a subject matter expert, and wanted to let you know that the purpose today is to give you an orientation of the Assessment Center, give you some tips, a little bit about the history of assessment centers, let you know the exercise types, how to prepare, and then also look at what you're going to be evaluated on in terms of performance dimensions. As you know, recently the oral review board was replaced by the assessment center method. And I know that the first thing that's on your mind is, well, what is an assessment center? Well, this is a definition from the American Psychological Association. And for those of you that have the handout, this is something that I wrote specifically for Fort Bend County. It has an abundance of information on the exercise types, the performance dimensions, how the scoring is done, and then at the last few pages, there's information on how you can get additional information, how you can prepare some of the resources, and then some of the textbooks or books that you can review to help you do the best on your assessment center. Okay, so this is the definition of an assessment center. It uses a standard evaluation of candidates through multiple inputs. That basically means that you have multiple opportunities to show that you can do what a sergeant does for the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Office. So the exercises that are developed have a high degree of relationship to what the duties and responsibilities are of a sergeant with the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Office. So second bullet, it includes simulation exercises closely related to the sergeant position. So if you look at the job description, and we'll look at it in just a minute, for a sergeant of the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Office, you'll see that one of the duties and responsibilities is to coach, guide, and lead personnel, right? So one of the performance dimensions that you would want to have is a high degree of leadership, right? So we'll look at what a definition is for that performance dimension of leadership. But back to the definition. Performance is rated by multiple assessors who are trained, and they look at specific behaviors, and then they independently grade you, and then after they grade you independently, they engage in a consensus discussion to give you an overall rating. So there's independent evaluations and then a consensus rating for your total performance. So the assessors are trained, they're subject matter experts, they're actually sergeants and above from other sheriff's offices. Okay, so it would not be appropriate for someone, for example, to evaluate you if they're not familiar with what it is to be a sergeant, correct? So the assessors, and you will probably do at least one exercise face-to-face with the assessors, and when we go over the exercise types, you'll see that sometimes assessors act as role players, and most of the time they don't. So they're just really receiving information from you, and they're recording behaviors. So the most important part about the assessment center method is that when we look at the history, you'll see that it has a high predictive validity for identifying people that are going to be successful on the job. Okay, the way that's done is that the exercises can help predict whether you can do the job of sergeant, and then the assessors who are rating you are already either sergeants or perhaps even lieutenants or captains with another sheriff's office. So in essence, the definition of an assessment center is a method for conducting simulated exercises that's rated or evaluated by a group of assessors who can tell, based upon certain dimensions, how you're performing and whether you would be a sergeant candidate, successful sergeant candidate with the sheriff's office. So this is a little bit of the history. So there are some biblical references to assessment centers, and there's also some information from South Asia on Indian and Pakistani assessments, but the literature basically shows that Germany is credited with establishing an assessment center method. The way they established that is right after World War I, after the Treaty of Versailles was signed, Germany no longer appointed nobility to their military leadership positions. What they did was they developed simulated exercises to determine who has the leadership traits to be a military officer. Well, the United Kingdom, they developed a War Office Selection Board for the same purpose. They created job simulation exercises to determine who the best leaders were for the military. And then in World War II, the U.S. developed the Office of Strategic Services, which was really the predecessor to the intelligence community. So what the OSS did is with their general, he made outreach to Britain and learned what type of intelligence tests to develop, personality tests, psychological assessments, and then they came up with these types of exercises right here. These are examples of job simulated exercises. The first one was a cover story. The cover story was where a candidate would develop his own pedigree. That means that he would establish a name, a fake background, fake employment, fake references, and then when questioned, he would have to support who he was, the false identity that he created. Then there was a map memory test. So because the U.S. was looking for people that could spy or do assassination sabotage, propaganda operations, they developed this skill. The map memory test was a simulated exercise where a military agent would be in foreign territory, enemy territory, and he would be meeting a courier with a map. The map would have significant locations like, say, where the enemy location is and points of interest, etc. But because there's danger in an espionage agent getting captured with the map, the candidate was given 8 minutes to memorize the map and then take a test, a multiple choice test, to show where specific locations were on the map. Okay, so that was another exercise. Then the other three, crossing rivers, building structures, the candidates were expected to build a structure within 10 minutes. And then the stress interrogations were meant to determine how people reacted under stress. Let's say that they were captured by an enemy combatant, what would they do if they were interrogated? Now, nothing about torture, just stress interrogations. So that's a little bit about the history. If you're interested, you can probably go on the internet and find a little bit more information. But what made this process, this assessment center process, more valid and reliable is that it has the backing of, for example, the American Psychological Association and also the International Project Management Association. So the IPMA has 6 editions of these ethical guidelines of what it is to have an assessment center. And those guidelines identify 10 essential elements. So in order for an assessment to be a true assessment, it has to have these 10 elements. The first one is a systematic analysis to determine job behavioral constructs. What that means is that if we look at the job description for sergeant, there are certain things that a sergeant has to be able to do. So based upon, like, let's say, for example, a subordinate counseling session, if we developed a subordinate counseling session, we would have to show that that's a job-relevant construct for a sergeant in the sheriff's office. And as a sergeant, that's one thing that you do, correct? You meet with citizens, you counsel, you guide, you coach, you direct subordinates, you handle problems. I think it was an excellent resource to have the problem-solving book on this test because, in essence, one of the major responsibilities you have is to solve problems, right? So you'll see the performance dimension of problem analysis and resolution as a performance dimension. and we get to that part, I'll talk a little bit more about that. But these are the 10 essential elements of assessment center. Behavioral classifications. These are going to be things like leadership, initiative, problem analysis and resolution, time management, decisiveness, judgment. The ones that we'll use in the sheriff's office, we'll show you in the later slide, but it gives you an idea of what you'll be evaluated on each exercise. Now, multiple assessment components. If you do not do as well on one exercise, you have 2 more or 3 more opportunities to show that you have the skills to be a supervisor, that you have the knowledge, skills, attitudes, and abilities. Because in essence, these performance dimensions are related to knowledge, skills, abilities, and assessment, attitudes that you should have. There should be a linkage between the constructs and the assessment components. So if you're, one of your exercises is a town hall meeting where there are crime problems, then those behaviors that are elicited from you should be related to one of the problem-solving elements that's part of the sergeant responsibilities. Again, simulated exercises. So you have to exhibit certain traits and characteristics in your assessments to make the maximum score on the performance dimensions, and we'll go over those in just a minute. And then assessors. The assessors are already experienced. They've been supervisors. Most of them are going to be lieutenants or captains, so they know what traits and characteristics, what the skills and abilities are for a successful sergeant. So the assessors do receive training because there are a couple of psychometrics, and these are ways that you can look at an instrument, because you can actually say that the assessment center is an instrument for examining performance. So it's got to be reliable, meaning that it's consistent over time. So for example, how you perform on an exercise and its evaluation by assessors should be consistent over time. So that, for example, if we have 2 groups of assessors, assessors will be 3 to 5 per group, okay? Because what you want is you want multiple observers, and then you want them to reach consensus. But the assessors do receive the training. They go through the exercises. They practice scoring. And then at the end, there should be inter-rater, what we call inter-rater reliability. There's another psychometric that's important, and that's validity. Remember, we mentioned predictive validity at the very beginning. Well, validity is related to accuracy. So if it's got predictive validity, that means that the assessments that the assessors rate you on are accurate. Okay? And so the only way they can be accurate is that they're truly related to what you do as a sergeant. And then the last 2, data integration and standardization. That just means that if you're given an exercise, that it's consistent and it's standard for everyone. So everyone here will receive the same exercises, the same instructions, and really the same expectations. Okay, so we talked just a little bit about the history. Really where the assessment center caught on as a best practice was in around 1957, with AT&T actually did a 20-year study. They used the assessment center to select their managers, and they found that their assessment center method was a good predictor of success, because their managers went on to be part of the executive staff, and it showed that the assessment center method, the exercises that they created, were good predictors of success. Okay, so now we're on the exercise types. Okay, so the first one is the in-basket exercise. This is perhaps one of the most common exercises. And if you were to step into your office as a sergeant on your first day and you have an in-basket, you would be expected to handle everything in your in-basket, correct? So the assessment center for in-basket, that exercise has in it complaints, emails, reports, maybe a request to review use of force or pursuit. It's going to have emails, it's going to have instructions from your lieutenant, perhaps even from your captain, and you're required to prioritize that, state whether you're going to delegate it or handle it yourself, and then write an action plan for that. So when you present it, you either present it as part of a form. The form itself will ask you, well, what type of action are you doing on this item? And are you going to delegate it? And what priority is this? Is it low priority, medium priority, high priority? So you would have to look at all those things. A recommended approach, for example, is to look at all the items first and find out which ones have to be done, which ones are urgent, which ones are high priority. Many times in an in-basket exercise, the candidates do not have time to finish all of the exercises. I recall taking the assessment from Justex Corporation in Houston, and we had 4 hours to take the assessment, and there were about 30 items. Okay, so one of the items required that we write a written action plan to something. So people that did not read the instructions carefully didn't pass the assessment, because the instructions will tell you exactly what needs to be done. And if you don't follow the instructions, you're going to lose points. So one of the first approaches is to look closely at what the instructions are. So on the in-basket, some of the dimensions that you're evaluated on are things like time management, problem analysis and resolution, leadership skills, interpersonal relationships, initiative. So we'll go over these in just a moment, but on the in-basket exercise, you'll be expected to determine how each item is to be resolved, okay? If I were to describe the assessment center in one key word, it would be problem solving. Because basically you're going to be challenged with problems, and then your responsibility is to resolve those. So in many of these cases, you'll develop an action plan. You really want to weigh all the information. If you need to, conduct research, conduct content crime analysis, get additional information, and then develop your action plan. And your action plan should have some dates for follow-up. It should indicate what the consequences are of inaction. It should have a follow-up period. So basically, you're managing the entire problem and not just, you've got to have an in-depth response, not something that's just too simplistic, okay? Because the assessors are looking at how well you analyze the problem. I know that in your problem-solving approaches, for example, one of the approaches was the scan, analyze, respond, and assess. You might want to apply that model, and you would want to show the assessors that you are aware of problem-solving approaches. So what else about the in-basket? So the in-basket, you might be asked to present your in-basket orally. That's one assessment center method. Another one is to fill out a form, like an action justification form, where you identify what priority it is, whether you're going to delegate it, and then what your action plan is, and then whether it's related to any other items in your in-basket. Okay, so any questions on the in-basket? Again, that's one of the most common exercises that you'll have. Okay, the next one is the citizen meeting. Okay, remember, you're going to be faced with having to handle problems. Okay, some, as it relates to citizens, what is it that citizens complain about? You know, many of the complaints have to do with crime problems, right? Social disorder and decay problems, juvenile delinquency, speeding vehicles. So in your approach to the exercises, start thinking about how you would handle certain problems. And remember, you're going to be expected to solve problems. Okay, so the citizen meeting can be, you have documents to read, and then you make a presentation to the assessors. The assessors may be role players. The assessment center exercises for Fort Bend County do not use any role players. Okay, but I've got to let you know all the different exercise types. So the citizen meeting can be 2 role players that are trained. They could be actors, and then they're playing a role either as one of the 2 citizens that's upset. In one exercise that I assessed, one of the citizens was a vendor, and the other citizen was the event coordinator. And they had problems in, they had a personality conflict, and they had conflicts about how the event should be held. So in essence, on the citizen meeting, you would also want to develop an action plan to resolve the questions that they have. Okay. Next one, excuse me. So subordinate counseling. Okay, so this is also another common one. As a supervisor, you're expected to counsel subordinates. So you may have problems such as absenteeism. Just think of some of the problems that you may have observed in your work, in your workstation. Things like attendance, productivity, complaints about somebody not doing something or somebody doing something inappropriate. And in all your exercises, you want to make sure that you don't violate department policy and that you act ethically and with accountability. Okay, another common exercise is roll call briefing. So you may be given tables and charts and maybe job performance ratings and complaints, and you've got to read the material and then determine what the high priority items are. And then when you hold the counseling session, you make sure that you, for example, establish rapport with the person that you're counseling, determine if these are job related